There's a certain kind of person who lives twice through every moment, once in reality, and once in the endless chambers of their mind. They rehearse conversations that haven't happened yet. They replay interactions from 3 days ago, searching for hidden meanings in a casual goodbye. They stand at the edge of decisions, not because they lack intelligence, but because they possess too much awareness of everything that could unfold. They notice the slight hesitation in someone's voice. They catalog the micro-expressions that flash across faces. They remember the exact tone you used when you said you were fine, and they always know, that fine meant something else entirely. But if you look closer, you'll notice something unexpected. These aren't people paralyzed by confusion. They're people drowning in clarity. They see too much, feel too much, understand too much. And that surplus of perception becomes its own kind of prison. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe you've watched them stare at a text message for 10 minutes before sending it, crafting and recrafting a single sentence as if it were a diplomatic treaty. Maybe you've seen them cancel plans at the last minute, not because they don't want to go, but because they've already experienced the entire evening in their mind, every potential awkward silence, every possible judgment, every way it could go wrong, and they're exhausted before it even begins. Or maybe, if you're honest, you've recognized pieces of this in yourself. That 3 a.m. mental spiral about something you said at lunch. The way you can turn a simple, "we need to talk," into an apocalyptic screenplay of abandonment. The exhaustion that comes not from doing, but from thinking about doing. From planning. From analyzing. From the sheer metabolic cost of running infinite simulations of reality inside your skull. What most people don't see is that this isn't just excessive worry or neurotic rumination. Psychologically, it's hypervigilant cognitive processing, a mind that has learned to treat every interaction, every decision, every moment as data that must be examined from every possible angle. It's what happens when your brain becomes convinced that if you just think hard enough, long enough, deeply enough, you can predict every outcome and prevent every pain. Their brain has learned to overthink because at some point, not thinking enough led to consequence. Maybe they were blindsided by something they should have seen coming. Maybe they were hurt by someone they should have known better than to trust. Maybe they made a choice that unraveled in ways they hadn't anticipated, and the lesson that sank into their neural pathways wasn't "mistakes happen." It was, "I must never miss a detail again." The overthinking mind operates like a probability engine that never shuts off. While others make decisions based on intuition or sufficient information, the overthinker needs complete information, which, in a complex world of infinite variables, can never truly exist. So they keep thinking. They keep analyzing. They keep running scenarios. It's not indecisiveness. It's the opposite. It's a desperate attempt at control in a world that feels fundamentally uncertain. But here's where it gets complex. The same analytical depth that exhausts them also makes them remarkably perceptive. The same tendency to imagine worst-case scenarios that keeps them up at night also helps them identify risks that others miss. The same overthinking that makes simple decisions feel monumental also allows them to understand human behavior with stunning accuracy. They become masters of reading between the lines but quietly struggle with taking things at face value. They develop an almost supernatural ability to detect insincerity, to sense when something is off, to notice the things people try to hide, but this gift comes at a cost. They can't turn it off. They can't stop analyzing. They can't experience a moment without simultaneously deconstructing it. What looks like anxiety is actually a profound form of conscientiousness taken to its breaking point. What looks like paralysis is actually a mind moving so fast, considering so many possibilities, that the body can't keep up. They've mastered the art of anticipation, but quietly struggle with the art of presence. And here's the cruelest irony. They overthink because they care. They replay that conversation because they don't want to have hurt someone. They agonize over that decision because they don't want to make a mistake that affects others. They lose sleep over their choices because they feel responsible not just for outcomes, but for every ripple effect their actions might create. It's not selfishness. It's hyper-responsibility. They don't overthink because they're consumed with themselves. They overthink because they're consumed with doing right by everyone, including a version of themselves they're terrified of disappointing. And isn't this where we all recognize ourselves? We all have our version of the endless loop. That voice that won't quiet. That question we can't stop asking. That decision we keep revisiting even after it's been made. The overthinker just lives in a state we all visit occasionally. They've simply set up permanent residence there. That tension between wanting certainty and accepting that life is inherently uncertain. Between needing control and surrendering to the uncontrollable. Between the desire to get it right and the reality that right is often unknowable until after the fact. Psychologists call this cognitive rigidity within cognitive flexibility, the paradox of a mind that can consider infinite perspectives but struggles to commit to any single one. It's the mental equivalent of standing at a crossroads with a map that shows every possible route, every potential detour, every conceivable destination, but no clear indication of which path is correct. So you stand there, studying the map, as time passes and the light changes and the moment to move slips away. The overthinker understands that every choice closes other doors. And they mourn those unopened doors. They grieve the lives unlived in every decision. Most people make a choice and move forward. The overthinker makes a choice and continues to inhabit the ghost versions of themselves who chose differently. This is what the Buddhist concept of monkey mind describes, the restless, unsettled consciousness that swings from branch to branch, never resting, never still. But for the chronic overthinker, it's not just monkey mind. It's an entire jungle of monkeys, each one chattering about a different possibility, a different worry, a different path not taken. And here's what makes this particularly exhausting. Overthinkers are often highly intelligent, deeply empathetic, and acutely self-aware. They can articulate exactly what they're doing. They can analyze their own analysis. They can think about their overthinking. This metacognition, this awareness of awareness, creates yet another layer to navigate. They know they're overthinking. They just don't know how to stop. They've tried, just not thinking about it. They've tried distraction, meditation, positive thinking, logical reasoning. They've told themselves all the rational truths, that most of what we worry about never happens, that rumination doesn't equal problem solving, that at some point you have to make a choice and live with it. They know all of this. Intellectually, they understand it perfectly. But knowing something cognitively and feeling it emotionally are two different neurological processes. The prefrontal cortex knows the worry is disproportionate. But the amygdala, that ancient alarm system in the brain, keeps ringing. And the overthinker is caught in the middle, trying to referee a conflict between the logical and the limbic. This is why well-meaning advice like, stop overthinking lands with the same utility as telling someone with insomnia to just relax. The very act of trying not to overthink becomes another thing to overthink. The effort to quiet the mind creates more mental noise. It's a trap with no clear exit. But there's something else happening beneath all of this, something that runs deeper than anxiety or perfectionism or control. The overthinker is trying to think their way to safety. Somewhere, consciously or unconsciously, they've absorbed the belief that if they can just anticipate every possibility, if they can just plan for every contingency, if they can just understand every angle, then they can protect themselves from being hurt, from being wrong, from being foolish, from being judged. The overthinking is armor. Heavy, exhausting armor that restricts movement and makes everything harder, but armor nonetheless. It's protection against the vulnerability of not knowing, against the embarrassment of being surprised, against the pain of being unprepared. What most people see as a problem to be fixed, the overthinker experiences as a solution to a deeper problem. The problem of existing in a world where bad things can happen, where people can hurt you, where your best intentions can lead to worst outcomes, where you can be blindsided despite your vigilance. And so they think, and think, and think. Not because they enjoy it. Not because it's serving them. But because at some fundamental level, they believe that thinking is the only tool they have. Let's talk about what this actually feels like from the inside. Imagine trying to watch a movie while simultaneously writing a review of it, predicting how it will end, analyzing the cinematography, critiquing the dialogue, comparing it to every other movie you've seen, worrying about whether your companion is enjoying it, wondering if you should have chosen a different film, and planning what you'll say about it afterward. You can't just watch. You can't just experience. You can't just be present with what's unfolding. Your mind is 3 steps ahead and 2 steps behind and somewhere off to the side all at once. This is every moment for the chronic overthinker. A simple question like, "How are you?" becomes a complex calculation. How honest should I be? What level of disclosure is appropriate for this relationship? Did they ask because they genuinely care or out of social obligation? What answer will they expect? What answer will disappoint them? What answer is true? Which truth? The surface truth or the deep truth? And in the seconds this calculation takes, the moment for a natural response has passed, and now you're awkward, and now you're overthinking the fact that you overthought, and it's exhausting. Every interaction is a multivariable equation. Every decision is a philosophical crisis. Every silence is a space that must be analyzed for meaning. But here's what makes this bearable, what makes it survivable, what makes it not just a curse but sometimes a strange kind of gift. The same mind that can't stop analyzing also can't stop caring. The same tendency toward rumination also creates capacity for deep empathy. The same hypervigilance that exhausts also protects, sometimes themselves, often others. Overthinkers make thoughtful friends. They remember the small details you mentioned in passing. They notice when you're not okay even when you say you are. They've considered the impact of their words before speaking them. They've thought through the consequences of their actions before taking them. They're the ones who anticipate needs before they're expressed, who see potential problems before they become actual crises, who understand nuance in a world that increasingly favors simplicity, who hold space for complexity when everything else demands reduction. Yes, this comes at a personal cost. Yes, they would probably be happier, or at least more at peace, with a quieter mind. But there's an integrity to their overthinking, a profound form of taking life seriously, of refusing to move through the world carelessly. In a culture that often celebrates impulsivity, that valorizes, "Don't think, just do," that frames overthinking as purely pathological, there's something to be honored in the person who pauses, who considers, who thinks deeply about their choices and their impact. What most people don't realize is that the overthinker isn't trying to be difficult. They're trying to be good. They're trying to be good friends, good partners, good employees, good children, good parents, good humans. And in their mind, being good requires thinking through every angle, anticipating every need, avoiding every mistake. The overthinking isn't vanity. It's a form of moral seriousness taken to an extreme. They're not worried about what to say because they're self-obsessed. They're worried about what to say because words have power and they don't want to accidentally hurt someone. They're not agonizing over decisions because they're indecisive. They're agonizing because they understand that choices have consequences and they want to make responsible ones. This is why telling an overthinker to care less misses the point entirely. They overthink precisely because they care so much. The solution isn't to reduce the caring, it's to find a way to care that doesn't require carrying the weight of every possible outcome. And isn't this, ultimately, a universal human struggle? We all grapple with how much to think versus how much to trust. How much to plan versus how much to surrender. How much responsibility to take for outcomes versus how much to accept as beyond our control. The overthinker simply faces this dilemma at an amplified frequency and intensity. We all know what it's like to lie awake replaying a conversation, wondering if we said the wrong thing. The overthinker does this not just occasionally, but as a default mode of processing. We all know what it's like to stand at a decision point feeling uncertain. The overthinker experiences this uncertainty as a constant state rather than an occasional visitor. They're not a different species. They're us, with the volume turned all the way up. And maybe that's why their struggle touches something universal. Because in their hypervigilance, we see our own desire for control. In their rumination, we see our own fear of getting it wrong. In their exhaustion, we see the cost of consciousness itself, the price we pay for being creatures who can reflect on our own existence, who can imagine alternative realities, who can question our own choices. The overthinker reminds us that awareness is not always comfortable. That consciousness can be a burden as much as a gift. That the examined life, while perhaps worth living, is not always easy to live. So if you are this person, if you've ever felt like your mind is a courtroom where you're simultaneously the defendant, the prosecutor, the jury, and the judge, if you've ever been exhausted by your own thoughts, if you've ever wished you could just turn down the volume on your awareness, even for a moment, know this: you're not broken. You're not defective. You're not too much, or too intense, or too sensitive. You're a deeply thoughtful person navigating a complex world with a mind that refuses to take shortcuts. And while that's harder, while it makes simple things complicated and complicated things overwhelming, it also means you bring a depth of consideration to your life that is increasingly rare. The overthinking that feels like a curse is also what makes you a person who others can trust. Because they know you've thought about them. You've considered them. You've taken them seriously. In a world of casual cruelty and thoughtless harm, you are someone who thinks before acting, who considers before speaking, who takes responsibility for your impact. Yes, you need to find ways to quiet the noise. Yes, you need to develop the capacity to make decisions without complete information. Yes, you need to learn that good enough is often good enough, that perfection is not only impossible but not actually required, that you can care deeply without caring everything. But you don't need to stop being thoughtful. You don't need to become someone who moves through the world without reflection. You don't need to trade your depth for ease. What you need is not to think less, but to trust more. Trust that you've thought about it enough. Trust that you've done your due diligence. Trust that you are allowed to rest even when there's more that could be considered. Trust that you can care about outcomes without controlling them. Trust that you can be responsible without being omniscient. Trust that it's okay to not have every answer. That it's okay to choose and then commit to your choice rather than continuing to second-guess it. That it's okay to experience a moment without simultaneously analyzing it. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes about the wisdom of no escape, the idea that liberation comes not from fleeing discomfort but from learning to be present with it. For the overthinker, this means something specific. Learning to be present with uncertainty without immediately trying to think your way out of it. Because here's a truth that might be hard to hear: you will never think your way to complete certainty. Never. The world is too complex, too interconnected, too full of variables that can't be predicted or controlled. No amount of overthinking will give you the guarantee you're seeking. But you can learn to act despite uncertainty. You can learn to choose imperfectly. You can learn to live with the knowledge that you might get it wrong, that you might miss something, that you might look back and wish you'd chosen differently, and that this is not a catastrophe. It's just being human. The goal isn't to silence your thoughtful mind. The goal is to develop a different relationship with it. To recognize when thinking is problem-solving and when it's just spinning. To notice when analysis is clarifying and when it's obscuring. To feel the difference between productive contemplation and rumination that goes nowhere. This requires developing what psychologists call metacognitive awareness. Not just thinking, but noticing how you're thinking. Creating a little space between you and your thoughts. Recognizing that you are not your overthinking. You are the awareness that notices the overthinking. And in that space, that tiny gap between thought and identification with thought, there's freedom. Here's a practice that might help. When you notice yourself spiraling, getting caught in the loop, ask yourself one simple question. Is this thinking moving me toward understanding or just toward exhaustion? If it's toward understanding, if you're actually processing something, integrating something, learning something, then think. By all means, think deeply. Your capacity for deep thought is valuable. But if it's toward exhaustion, if you're rehashing the same concern for the 20th time with no new insight, if you're imagining scenarios that grow increasingly unlikely, if you're stuck in a mental groove that just goes around and around, then that's your signal to step back. Not because the concern isn't valid, but because you've thought about it enough for now. You've done your due diligence. The next step is not more thinking. It's either action or acceptance. This isn't about suppressing your thoughts. It's about recognizing when thinking has done what it can do, and trusting yourself enough to stop. And maybe that's the deepest lesson here. The overthinker needs to learn to trust themselves. Because underneath all the analysis, beneath all the rumination, at the core of all the overthinking, there's often a fundamental self-doubt. A quiet belief that if they just thought about it a little more, considered one more angle, examined one more possibility, then they'd finally arrive at the right answer, the perfect choice, the guaranteed outcome. But that's not how life works. And you already know this. Your wise mind, the part of you that exists beneath the spinning thoughts, already knows that perfection is impossible, that certainty is a myth, that you're going to have to choose and move forward eventually. The overthinking is, in part, a way of delaying the moment when you have to trust your own judgment. When you have to say, "I've considered this enough, and now I choose." When you have to risk being wrong, being imperfect, being human. And that's scary. Of course it's scary. Because choosing means closing other options. Acting means accepting consequences. Moving forward means leaving the safety of contemplation for the vulnerability of action. But here's what I want you to know. You are more capable than your overthinking suggests. Your first instinct is often better than your 40th revision. Your intuition, when you can quiet the noise enough to hear it, is wiser than your anxiety. You don't need to think your way to worthiness. You don't need to analyze your way to okayness. You don't need to overthink your way to deserving rest, love, peace, acceptance. You already deserve those things. Not because you've thought about it hard enough, but because you're here, you're trying, you're doing your best with the mind you have. There's a story about a monk who spent years studying every sacred text, learning every meditation technique, analyzing every teaching. One day, his teacher asked him to stop studying and just sit by the river. "But I haven't finished learning," the monk protested. "You've learned enough," the teacher said. "Now it's time to simply be." If you're someone who overthinks, you've likely learned enough. You've analyzed enough. You've considered enough. You've been vigilant enough. Now it's time to simply be. To experience a moment without dissecting it. To make a choice without agonizing over every alternative. To trust that you've thought about it enough, that you are enough, that you know enough to move forward. This doesn't mean becoming reckless or careless. It doesn't mean abandoning your thoughtful nature. It means recognizing that your thoughtfulness has done its job, and now other parts of you, your intuition, your courage, your capacity for trust, need space to do theirs. Because here's the truth that might set you free. The thing you're most afraid of, that you'll miss something crucial, that you'll make a mistake, that you'll wish you'd thought about it more, will probably happen at some point regardless of how much you overthink. You will miss things. You will make mistakes. You will have regrets. Not because you didn't think hard enough, but because you're human and life is complex and hindsight always has better vision than foresight. But you will survive those moments. You will adapt. You will learn. You will continue. Just as you've survived every other moment of uncertainty, every other imperfect choice, every other time things didn't go exactly as planned. Your overthinking has been trying to protect you from this reality. But you don't need protection from being human. You need permission to be human. Perfectly, messily, imperfectly human. And maybe that's the most beautiful part, that after all the thinking, all the analyzing, all the ruminating, what remains is simply this. You are trying. You are caring. You are doing your best to move through the world thoughtfully, to treat people well, to make good choices with incomplete information. The overthinking isn't who you are. It's what you do when you forget that you are enough as you are. When you forget that your judgment is trustworthy. When you forget that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of peace. So yes, you are someone who thinks deeply, who feels intensely, who considers carefully. These are not flaws to be fixed, but features of a complex inner life. What needs to shift is not the thinking itself, but the relationship with the thinking. The belief that you need to think your way to safety. The fear that if you stop analyzing, you'll be vulnerable. The conviction that more thought equals more control. You can think deeply and still act decisively. You can care intensely and still let go. You can be thoughtful and still trust. You can be all of who you are, complex, contemplative, conscientious, and still give yourself permission to rest. The peace you're seeking isn't on the other side of one more thought. It's in the space between thoughts. In the breath you take before the next analysis begins. In the moment when you decide that you've thought about it enough, and now it's time to trust. Trust yourself. Trust the process. Trust that life will unfold as it will, regardless of how much you think about it. And trust that you, thoughtful, deep, overthinking you, will navigate whatever comes with the same care and consciousness you bring to everything else. You are not your thoughts. You are the vast awareness that contains them. And in that awareness, there is space. There is peace. There is permission to finally rest.